If you'd asked me a year ago what my life was like, I'd have said it was as close to perfect as it gets. I had a steady job, a warm home, and most importantly, a loving wife and two incredible kids. Rachel and I had been married for 10 years, and while no marriage is without its challenges, I thought we were solid. We had built a life together, and our two kids, Abigail and Noah, were at the center of it all. I loved our routines, the simple things, pancake breakfasts on Saturday mornings, cheering Abigail on at her soccer games, helping Noah with his homework. Those were the moments that grounded me, that made the long hours at work worth it. Rachel had always been the glue holding everything together, the one who kept our chaotic lives running smoothly. But looking back now, I realized the cracks were there long before I noticed them. It all started innocently enough. Rachel came home one afternoon with an excited smile, her eyes sparkling like they used to when we first met. "You won't believe who I ran into at the hospital today," she said, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. I was curious. "Who?" "Daniel," she said, her voice light with nostalgia. "You remember him, don't you? My childhood best friend? We used to do everything together." I vaguely remembered her mentioning him once or twice over the years. Some boy from her past, someone she'd lost touch with after college. "What was he doing at the hospital?" I asked. "Oh, just a routine checkup, same as me," she said, waving it off. We caught up for a bit. It was so nice to see him after all these years. Her smile was genuine, and at the time, I didn't think much of it. Why would I? She was my wife. I trusted her. But then Daniel started appearing more often. At first, it was just small things. She'd mention him in passing, laughing about something he'd said or reminiscing about their childhood antics. "Did you know Daniel used to build tree houses in his backyard?" she'd say, as if it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Then came the messages. I'd catch glimpses of her phone lighting up with his name, a string of texts she'd read with a smile before quickly locking the screen. "It's just Daniel," she'd say when I asked. "We're catching up. It's harmless." I wanted to believe her, so I did. But the more I watched, the more I felt something was off. One evening, as we sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, I brought it up. "You and Daniel seem to be talking a lot lately," I said, keeping my tone light. Rachel looked at me, her expression calm but slightly defensive. "Michael, he's just a friend. We've known each other since we were kids. You have nothing to worry about." Her reassurance should have been enough, but it wasn't. Maybe it was the way she said it, too quick, too rehearsed. Or maybe it was the fact that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she spoke. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as the weeks went on, Daniel became more than just a name in her stories. He became a presence in our lives. Rachel would invite him over for dinner, saying it would be good for him to meet the family. He'd show up with a bottle of wine and a charming smile, laughing with the kids and swapping stories with Rachel that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. The kids loved him, of course. Abigail called him Uncle Daniel after the second visit, and Noah followed him around like a shadow. I wanted to be happy that Rachel had reconnected with an old friend, but the unease in my gut only grew. I tried talking to her again, voicing my concerns. "It feels like he's here all the time," I said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Don't you think it's a bit much?" Rachel sighed, setting down the dish she was rinsing. "Michael, you're being ridiculous. He's part of my past, and now he's just a friend. Why can't you let it go?" I couldn't explain it, but I knew something wasn't right. Still, I backed off, not wanting to push her away. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking, but deep down, I knew the truth. The cracks in our picture-perfect family were growing, and it was only a matter of time before they shattered everything. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Daniel was just an old friend helping Rachel reconnect with her past, a reminder of simpler times. But as weeks turned into months, his presence became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the occasional visit or the friendly text anymore. Daniel was everywhere. He started joining us for family outings, picnics at the park, trips to the zoo, even Sunday lunch after church. He'd show up with his signature smile and an easygoing charm that seemed to win everyone over. Abigail and Noah adored him. He'd play soccer with Noah for hours, or sit with Abigail and help her sketch pictures of her favorite animals. The kids started asking for him, too. Is Uncle Daniel coming today? Abigail would ask, her eyes lighting up. Noah would follow with, I hope he brings his soccer ball. I wanted to share their excitement, but something about Daniel didn't sit right with me. He wasn't just friendly. He was too friendly, too polished, too perfect. It was like he was trying to ingratiate himself into every corner of our lives. Then there was the way he interacted with Rachel. They had this energy between them. It wasn't overt, nothing anyone else would notice, but I saw it. The way their eyes lingered on each other just a fraction too long. The inside jokes that went over my head. The way Rachel's face lit up whenever he walked into the room. And Daniel wasn't subtle about pushing boundaries, either. He'd show up unannounced, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Once, I came home early from work to find him fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Rachel mentioned it was bothering her, he said with a shrug, as if that justified him playing handyman in my house. Rachel, of course, defended him at every turn. He's just trying to help, she'd say. You're reading too much into it. But I wasn't. I could feel it, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Daniel wasn't just a friend reconnecting with Rachel. He was insinuating himself into her life, into our lives, and it was deliberate. One evening, I decided to address it head-on. We were sitting on the couch after putting the kids to bed. Rachel was scrolling through her phone, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I didn't have to ask who she was texting. Rachel, I began, keeping my voice calm. Don't you think Daniel's been around a lot lately? She looked up, her brow furrowing. What do you mean? I mean, he's here all the time, I said. He's at our family outings, helping around the house. It feels like he's becoming a permanent fixture. She sighed, setting her phone down. Michael, he's my friend. My best friend from childhood. Why is that such a problem for you? It's not the friendship, I said, choosing my words carefully. It's how much he's here. It's how comfortable he seems in our lives, like he's trying to insert himself into places he doesn't belong. Her expression hardened. You're being ridiculous. Daniel isn't doing anything wrong. He's just a good person trying to be part of my life again. Why can't you trust me? It's not about trust, I said, though even I wasn't sure if that was true anymore. It's about boundaries. This is our family, Rachel, not his. She stood, crossing her arms. You're being paranoid, Michael. You always jump to the worst conclusions. Her words stung, but I let them hang in the air. Arguing would get us nowhere, and I didn't want to fight in front of the kids. Instead, I watched her retreat to the bedroom, her phone already in hand as she disappeared down the hallway. That night, I lay awake, replaying the conversation in my head. Was I being paranoid? Was I overreacting? Or was my gut telling me something I didn't want to admit? The next morning, Daniel showed up again, this time with coffee and pastries for everyone. Thought I'd stop by and brighten your day, he said with a grin, handing Rachel her favorite latte as though he knew her preferences better than I did. I thanked him politely, but the unease in my chest grew heavier. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. And no matter how much Rachel insisted otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wasn't just a visitor in our lives. He was an intruder, and I was the only one who saw it. The unsettling presence of Daniel had become a shadow over our family, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. Looking back, the signs were all there. The late nights, the quiet whispers, the way Rachel's phone never left her side. At the time, I chalked it up to her being busy or stressed, but deep down, something didn't feel right. It was like trying to hold water in my hands, slipping through my fingers before I could grasp it. Rachel had always been the kind of woman who could balance everything. Work, kids, marriage. She handled it all with grace. But as Daniel's presence grew in her life, it was like she couldn't be bothered anymore. Family dinners turned into quick meals thrown together without thought. Abigail's soccer games and Noah's school projects fell by the wayside. Rachel always had an excuse. I'll make it next time, she'd say, but next time never came. At first, I thought she was just overwhelmed. Let's plan a weekend away, I suggested one night as we sat in the living room, her eyes glued to her phone. Just the two of us. It's been a while. She barely looked up. I can't, Michael. Work's been crazy, and I've got so much on my plate. Maybe later. Later became her default answer. Later, when things settle down. Later, when work isn't so hectic. Later, when the kids are older. But later never came. What I didn't know was that while I was trying to hold our marriage together, Rachel and Daniel were slipping away into their own world. It started with the texts. Quick messages at first, inside jokes, memories of their childhood. Then they became more frequent, more personal. Late-night exchanges filled with emojis, winks, and words that I could only guess at. She would sit on the couch, her phone angled away from me, a soft smile playing on her lips as she typed. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd laugh it off. "Just Daniel," she'd say. "He's been going through a tough time lately. I'm just being a good friend." Friendship. That was her shield, the excuse she clung to as the boundaries blurred. Their friendship turned into secret meetings. A lunch here, a coffee there. Harmless on the surface, but each one pulling her further away from our family. I remember calling her one afternoon to ask if she could pick up Noah from school. "I can't," she said, her voice hurried. "I'm in a meeting." Later that evening, I found a receipt for a coffee shop tucked into her purse, time-stamped for the same hour she was supposed to be in that meeting. "Who were you with?" I asked, holding up the slip. She hesitated, her face flushing. "Daniel," she admitted. "We just grabbed a quick coffee. It wasn't a big deal." "It feels like a big deal," I said, my voice tight. "Michael, you're overreacting," she snapped. "He's my friend. That's all he is." But it wasn't all he was. I started noticing changes in her. The way she dressed, the way she carried herself. She started wearing makeup again, choosing outfits with a little more thought. She'd hum to herself as she got ready in the morning, a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in years. But that lightness wasn't for me. Daniel, emboldened by Rachel's attention, began pushing boundaries in ways I couldn't ignore. He'd make little comments during family gatherings, subtle digs disguised as jokes. "Michael, you're lucky Rachel keeps everything running smoothly," he'd say with a grin, as if I were just a bystander in my own home. Once, he even offered to help Abigail with her math homework while I was sitting right there. "I've got this," I said firmly, but he just shrugged and said, "Didn't mean to step on your toes, man." Rachel, instead of defending me, laughed. "Michael's a little territorial," she said, as if I were the one overstepping. The worst part wasn't the comments or the meetings. It was the way Rachel looked at him. I caught it one evening when he came over to drop off a book he'd borrowed. She opened the door, and for a split second, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. That look wasn't for me. I tried to bring it up again, tried to tell her how I felt, but she brushed me off. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her tone sharp. "You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining the distance between us. I wasn't imagining the way she pulled away when I tried to hold her hand, or the excuses she made when I wanted to spend time together. I wasn't imagining the way she and Daniel seemed to share a language I couldn't understand, a connection that shut me out completely. I didn't know how far it had gone. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I was losing her. And Daniel was the reason why. It was supposed to be a good day. The sun was shining, Abigail and Noah were running around the backyard with their friends, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with our neighbors, doing my best to push aside the unease that had taken root in my chest over the past few months. Rachel had insisted we invite Daniel. "He's practically family," she'd said, brushing off my protests. I didn't want him there. Didn't want him near my wife, my kids, or my home. But for the sake of keeping the peace, I relented. He showed up late, of course, strolling into the yard with his signature charm and a bottle of wine that Rachel immediately gushed over. He greeted Abigail and Noah like an indulgent uncle, scooping them up and twirling them around while Rachel watched with a smile that was far too warm for my liking. I focused on the grill, trying to keep my emotions in check. This was just a barbecue, I told myself. A few hours, and then he'd be gone. But Daniel had a way of making himself the center of attention. He told loud, animated stories that had everyone laughing, his eyes constantly flicking to Rachel as if she were his audience of one. When the kids tugged on my shirt, asking me to join their game of tag, I felt torn. Leaving the grill meant leaving him unsupervised. But the look of disappointment on Noah's face made the decision for me. 5 minutes, I told myself as I ran after the kids, their laughter echoing through the yard. When I came back, something was different. Rachel and Daniel were standing near the patio, talking in low voices. Too close. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way he leaned in, the way her body angled toward him, it made my stomach churn. The moment came out of nowhere. 1 second, they were talking, and the next, Daniel reached out, cupped Rachel's face with his hand, and leaned in to kiss her. Right there, in front of everyone. Time seemed to slow. Abigail and Noah froze mid-step, their innocent eyes wide with confusion. The chatter of our guests faded into stunned silence. And me? I felt something inside me snap. Hey! I shouted, my voice like thunder. I closed the distance between us in a few quick strides, shoving Daniel away from Rachel with enough force to make him stumble. He turned to me, his arrogant smirk still plastered on his face. What the hell do you think you're doing? I growled, my fists clenched at my sides. Relax, Michael, he said, brushing himself off as if I were the one out of line. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? My voice rose, raw with fury. You tried to kiss my wife in front of our kids. Rachel stepped between us, her face pale. Michael, stop. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I snapped, incredulous. Are you kidding me right now? Daniel's smug expression was the last straw. Without thinking, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw with a sickening crack, and he went down like a sack of bricks, clutching his face and groaning in pain. The yard erupted in chaos. Abigail and Noah started crying. The other guests gasped in shock, and Rachel screamed my name like I was the one who had shattered everything. How could you do this? She yelled, kneeling beside Daniel. You're acting like a madman. I stared at her, my chest heaving. How could I do this? How could you let him get this close? How could you let this happen in front of our kids? Her silence was deafening. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend me. Instead, she helped Daniel to his feet, her hands trembling as she whispered apologies to him. I turned to see Abigail and Noah huddled together, tears streaming down their faces. My heart broke for them. They didn't deserve this. None of us did. I'm sorry, I said, my voice softer now as I crouched down to their level. This isn't your fault. Daddy's just upset. The guests began to filter out, muttering awkward goodbyes as they avoided my gaze. Rachel led Daniel inside to clean up, leaving me alone in the yard with the mess we'd made, both literal and figurative. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where everything had fallen apart. The barbecue, the family gathering, the illusion of normalcy. It was all gone. And for the first time, I realized just how deep the cracks in our marriage ran. This wasn't just about a kiss or a broken jaw. This was about trust, respect, and a betrayal I couldn't ignore any longer. Something had to change, and I was done waiting for Rachel to choose between me and Daniel. The aftermath of the barbecue was chaos. Abigail and Noah were still upset, their questions hanging in the air unanswered. I did my best to calm them down, putting on a brave face and reassuring them that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. Meanwhile, Rachel was inside with Daniel, tending to his broken jaw like he was the victim in all of this. The sight of her fussing over him made my blood boil, but I held my tongue for the kid's sake. I couldn't afford to lose control again. Not yet. As the guests trickled out and the night quieted down, I stayed outside, staring at the mess of the yard and trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't until later, when I went inside to clean up, that I noticed it. Daniel's phone sitting on the kitchen counter, forgotten in the chaos. At first, I hesitated. It felt wrong to go through someone else's private property. But then I remembered the smug way Daniel had looked at me, the way Rachel had defended him instead of me, and the way my children had cried. I needed answers, and if they weren't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. The phone was unlocked. Of course it was. Daniel was arrogant enough to think he'd never get caught. I scrolled through his messages, my hands trembling as I searched for the truth I already suspected. And there it was. Message after message between him and Rachel. Flirty, suggestive, and unmistakably intimate. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Michael doesn't appreciate you the way I do. When can I see you again? My stomach churned as I read through their exchanges, each one a dagger to the heart. There were photos, too. Selfies of the two of them, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. Pictures of them at coffee shops, at the park, places she'd told me she was going alone or with the kids. The final blow was a video. It was taken in a hotel room, the two of them laughing as Daniel leaned in to kiss her. She didn't pull away. I couldn't watch anymore. My hands shook as I set the phone down, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. I confronted Rachel as soon as Daniel left. She was in the living room, her arms crossed defensively as she waited for me to speak. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. "About what?" she snapped, already on edge. "About this." I held up Daniel's phone, the screen still lit with one of their messages. Her face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "He left it here," I said, "and I'm glad he did. Now I know the truth." Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Michael, it's not what it looks like. Don't insult my intelligence," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the messages, the pictures, the video. How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen." A mistake?" I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. "You call months of lying, sneaking around, and betraying our family a mistake? You let this man into our home, around our kids, and you expect me to believe it was an accident?" Rachel collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. "I was lonely, Michael. You were always so busy, and Daniel. He made me feel seen." I stared at her, my heart breaking and hardening all at once. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I've been here, Rachel. I've been here for you, for the kids, for our family. You're the one who chose him." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please, Michael. I love you. I want to fix this." But I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own heart shattering. "Fix this?" I repeated bitterly. "How do you fix something that's already broken?" Rachel reached out to me, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing in more ways than one. "You made your choice, Rachel," I said, my voice cold. "And now I'm making mine." I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the couch. My mind was already racing with what came next, protecting Abigail and Noah, rebuilding the pieces of my life that she and Daniel had so carelessly shattered. There was no coming back from this, not for her and not for us. The morning after the barbecue felt like waking up in the middle of a battlefield. The house was quiet, but the tension hung in the air like smoke. Rachel was avoiding me, staying in the bedroom with the door shut. Abigail and Noah were unusually subdued, their usual chatter replaced by the kind of silence that made my chest ache. I knew I had to act. The betrayal wasn't just a fracture in my marriage. It was a threat to my children's stability. They were my priority now, and I couldn't let Rachel's choices or Daniel's interference disrupt their lives any further. I started documenting everything. Every missed soccer game, every forgotten permission slip, every time Rachel chose to disappear with Daniel instead of being there for the kids. I kept a journal of dates and details, ensuring there would be no question about her neglect if it came to a legal battle. The evidence from Daniel's phone became the backbone of my case. The messages, photos, and videos were damning, but I needed more. I began quietly recording Rachel's behavior, her late-night disappearances, her indifference toward the kids, and her constant texting. Every piece of evidence was another step toward protecting Abigail and Noah from the chaos Rachel had brought into our home. Meanwhile, the fallout from the barbecue was hitting Daniel hard. His broken jaw was the least of his problems. Word of what had happened spread quickly through our neighborhood, thanks to a few overly chatty guests. People whispered about how he had disrespected me in my own home, about the audacity of his actions in front of my children. Friends who once welcomed him with open arms began avoiding him. Invitations dried up. His charm and charisma couldn't smooth over what had become a public scandal. Even his colleagues began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the man who had tried to kiss another man's wife at a family event. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction watching his world crumble. For too long, Daniel had operated with impunity, crossing boundaries and inserting himself into places he didn't belong. Now, he was reaping the consequences of his arrogance. But Rachel wasn't immune to the fallout either. Her family, once proud of the life she had built, began asking hard questions. Her mother called me one evening, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Michael, what's going on with Rachel? People are talking, and I don't know what to believe." I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her the truth, about the affair, about the barbecue, about the messages I had found. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she spoke. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I never thought she'd. I don't know what to say." Her friends started pulling away too. The same people who had once admired Rachel's wit and charm now saw her as the woman who had betrayed her husband and children for an old flame. Social invitations dwindled, and when she did show up, the whispers followed her. Rachel tried to regain control of her life, but it was like trying to hold water in her hands. She'd come home late, her face pale and drawn, her movements sluggish. When she wasn't avoiding me, she was trying to justify herself. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said one evening, standing in the kitchen as I worked on the kids' dinner. I didn't look up, but it did, and now we're here. "I'm trying, Michael," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to fix it." I finally met her gaze, my expression cold. "You don't fix betrayal, Rachel. You live with the consequences." The weight of her choices was crushing her, and part of me wanted to feel pity. But every time I saw Abigail and Noah's confused, hurt faces, any pity I might have felt vanished. The kids were my focus now. I made a point of being present for them in ways Rachel no longer could. I attended every soccer game, helped with every school project, and read them bedtime stories every night. Slowly, they began to feel safe again, their laughter returning in small bursts that reminded me why I was fighting so hard. Rachel's life continued to spiral, and Daniel's reputation remained in tatters. But I didn't care about them anymore. My only concern was building a stable, loving environment for my children, a life where they wouldn't have to question their place or their worth. The fallout was devastating for Rachel and Daniel, but for me, it was a beginning, a chance to reclaim what truly mattered and ensure my children were protected from the storm their mother had unleashed. The decision to file for divorce wasn't an easy one. In fact, it was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. There were days when I thought about how everything used to be, how Rachel and I were once a team, how we had dreams for the future, for our children. But those dreams were shattered by her betrayal, and I couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay. I had to protect our children. Abigail and Noah needed stability, a life free of the tension and dishonesty that had taken root in our home. I hired a lawyer, Sandra, someone with experience in high-conflict divorces. She was sharp, no nonsense, and determined to help me get full custody of the kids. "The evidence you've gathered is strong, Michael," she said during our first meeting, "but you need to be prepared. Rachel is going to fight this. She'll use everything she can to twist the narrative." I knew she was right. Rachel wasn't going to let go easily, and she'd been through enough humiliation already. But what was left for me to do? I had to ensure the kids were taken care of. I had to ensure that they were safe. As I prepared for the court battle, I revisited the evidence. The messages between Rachel and Daniel, the photos, the videos, the dates and details of all the times she had neglected Abigail and Noah for the sake of her affair. I had everything I needed. I had seen how Rachel had slowly pulled away from the family, how she had put herself first time and time again while abandoning the responsibilities that came with being a mother and a wife. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the weight of it hit me hard as I walked into the courtroom. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my children's future. The kids were at home with my parents, safe from the chaos that was about to unfold. Rachel was already seated at the other side of the room when I walked in. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment, and I saw the guilt flash across her face. But it was quickly replaced by anger. She had always been good at deflecting, but I couldn't afford to feel sorry for her anymore. She had made her choices. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the judge, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice firm, "I am requesting full custody of Abigail and Noah. I have worked tirelessly to provide a stable, loving home for them, and I am their primary caregiver. Rachel's actions have caused irreparable harm to our family, and I can no longer allow her poor judgment and emotional neglect to continue affecting their well-being." I presented the evidence, text messages, photos, and documented instances where Rachel had been absent from the kids' lives. I highlighted the nights when she'd stayed out late with Daniel, the missed soccer games and parent-teacher meetings, and her general disregard for their emotional needs. Every piece of evidence reinforced my claim that Rachel had put herself and her affair before the children. Sandra followed up with a concise and compelling argument. "Rachel's behavior has caused significant emotional harm to the children. It is in their best interest that they remain in a stable, supportive environment, and that is what Michael can offer them." Rachel's lawyer, a slick man in a sharp suit, tried to spin the narrative in her favor. He painted Rachel as a woman who had been pushed to the edge, someone who had been neglected by me, whose needs were ignored in the marriage. "This affair," he said, "was the result of years of emotional neglect. Rachel acted out of loneliness, as any person would under such circumstances." I felt my blood pressure rise. It was as though he was trying to justify her actions, to paint me as the villain in all of this. But it wasn't about my shortcomings. It was about her choices. It was about her actions that had torn our family apart. Rachel, for her part, took the stand and tried to explain herself. She spoke of how she had felt alone in our marriage, how I had been too focused on work, too distant. "I never meant for things to get this far," she said, her voice breaking. "But Daniel made me feel seen. I was lost, and I made a terrible mistake. I love my children, and I want to be part of their lives." Her words were a far cry from the woman I had known. They were empty, desperate. She pleaded for forgiveness, for a second chance. But it wasn't just a mistake. What she had done was a betrayal, and no amount of pleading could take that away. The judge listened carefully, but the evidence was undeniable. The affair had gone on for months, and Rachel had neglected her family for the sake of it. When the judge finally spoke, I felt a sense of relief. After reviewing the evidence, I find that full custody is in the best interest of the children. The emotional neglect demonstrated by Rachel has made it clear that she is unable to provide the stability and care that the children need. Michael will have full custody, with supervised visitation for Rachel. Rachel's face turned pale. She didn't cry, but I saw the shock in her eyes. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She had lost. As we left the courtroom, Sandra gave me a brief nod of congratulations. But the victory felt hollow. I had won, yes, but it had come at a great cost. I wasn't celebrating. I was just grateful that Abigail and Noah would be safe, that they wouldn't have to live in a house where they couldn't trust the person who should have been their greatest protector. In the days that followed, Rachel tried to reach out, sending me messages asking for a chance to explain, to rebuild. But I knew better. There was no rebuilding what she had destroyed. I was done. I focused on the kids. They needed me now more than ever, and I was determined to give them the life they deserved, one where they didn't have to carry the weight of Rachel's mistakes. If there was one thing I'd learned through this ordeal, it was that arrogance has a way of catching up with people. Daniel had spent months acting as though he was untouchable, manipulating Rachel, undermining me, and inserting himself into my family. But when the truth finally came to light, his carefully constructed world began to crumble, piece by piece. It started with the fallout from the barbecue. News of the incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered about how Daniel had tried to kiss another man's wife in front of her children, about the fight that had erupted, and about his audacity to even show his face at my home. Those whispers quickly turned into outright disdain. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. Friends who had laughed at his jokes and welcomed him to their gatherings stopped returning his calls. Even Rachel's attempt to defend him, claiming that it wasn't what it looked like, did nothing to stem the tide of judgment. But the real blow came when the details of the affair leaked. I didn't intend to make it public, but when I filed for divorce, The evidence became part of the court proceedings. The texts, the photos, the videos. It was all there in black and white, and word got out fast. Daniel's reputation, built on charm and charisma, disintegrated almost overnight. His workplace was the first to take action. He worked in real estate, an industry where connections and trust were everything. His boss, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, had no tolerance for scandals that could tarnish the company's name. "I can't have this kind of drama associated with my firm," Karen reportedly told him during his termination meeting. "Your behavior is unprofessional and frankly disgraceful. Pack your things." Losing his job was just the beginning. Daniel's clients, many of whom had become friends over the years, severed ties immediately. They didn't want their names associated with a man who had publicly humiliated himself. Contracts were canceled, deals fell through, and his professional network evaporated like smoke. Then there was his personal life. Daniel had been single for years, relying on his charm to float through various flings and friendships. But charm only takes you so far. Once the scandal broke, people saw him for who he truly was, a manipulative, self-serving man who had no respect for boundaries. His casual relationships ended abruptly, and his social circle dwindled to nothing. I heard bits and pieces about his struggles through mutual acquaintances. He tried to find work at smaller firms, but word of his reputation followed him wherever he went. The real estate community was tight-knit, and no one wanted to take a chance on someone with so much baggage. He spiraled. The confident, smug man who had once strutted through life was now a shadow of himself. His car, a flashy sports model he had once flaunted, was repossessed. His apartment in the city, another symbol of his supposed success, was put up for rent after he fell behind on payments. The final nail in the coffin came when he tried to reach out to Rachel. She was already dealing with her own fallout and wanted nothing to do with him. She blocked his number, cut off contact, and told him in no uncertain terms that he had ruined her life as much as his own. Daniel's humiliation was complete when he packed up what little he had left and left town. No one knew where he went, and honestly, no one cared. The man who had once walked into my home with a smug smile, who had tried to insert himself into my family, was now a forgotten name. A cautionary tale people whispered about over coffee. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction. Watching Daniel's downfall wasn't just about justice. It was a reminder that actions have consequences. He had tried to destroy my family, and in the end, he destroyed himself. But even as I watched his life crumble, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity. He had built his world on lies and arrogance, and now he had nothing left. He had become a cautionary tale, a man brought down by his own hubris. Daniel's downfall was inevitable, but it was also a stark reminder for me to focus on what mattered most. Rebuilding my own life and protecting my children from the wreckage he had tried to bring into our home. After the dust settled, after the court battles and the neighborhood whispers died down, Rachel was left standing in the ruins of her choices. She had lost everything: her marriage, her reputation, and the respect of those closest to her. For a while, she disappeared into herself, barely reaching out except to arrange the court-mandated supervised visits with Abigail and Noah. But something changed in her. Maybe it was the realization of what she had done, or maybe it was the sight of our children's quiet disappointment during those visits. Whatever it was, Rachel decided to face the consequences head-on. It started with a message. "Michael, I need to talk," she wrote one evening. "Not about us, about me. I've made mistakes, and I want to fix them. Not for us, but for the kids. Can we meet?" I hesitated before replying. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her to deal with the mess she'd created. But another part, the part that wanted to be fair, for Abigail and Noah's sake, agreed. We met at a neutral spot, a small park where the kids wouldn't overhear us. Rachel looked different. She wasn't the confident, put-together woman I'd known for so many years. Her eyes were tired. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her guilt was too much to bear. She started talking before I even had a chance to ask why she called me there. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "For everything. For the lies, for the hurt, for the way I treated you and the kids. I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to try to make things right." I didn't say anything at first. I just let her talk. She told me about the therapy session she'd started, about how her therapist had encouraged her to take accountability for her actions. She admitted how deeply she regretted letting Daniel into her life, how she had been selfish and blind to the damage she was causing. "I wasn't just a bad wife," she said, her voice breaking. "I was a bad mother. And that's what hurts the most. I love Abigail and Noah more than anything, but I let them down. I let all of you down." For the first time in months, I saw sincerity in her eyes. This wasn't the defensive, deflecting Rachel I had argued with during the divorce proceedings. This was someone who was truly trying to take responsibility. She asked for my help, not for us to get back together, but to let her be a better mother to our children. "I want to rebuild my relationship with them," she said. "They deserve a mom who shows up for them, who puts them first. Please, Michael, I'll do whatever it takes." I told her I appreciated her efforts, but I couldn't just open the door and let her walk back into their lives without boundaries. Abigail and Noah had been through too much, and I wasn't about to let them get hurt again. "They need stability," I said firmly. "They need to know they can rely on me, and I can't risk that for them." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said. "I'll take it slow. I just want a chance to show them that I'm trying." Over the next few months, Rachel made good on her promises. She continued therapy and even started attending parenting classes to learn how to rebuild trust with the kids. During her supervised visits, she was attentive and patient, focusing entirely on Abigail and Noah instead of trying to argue with me or justify herself. The kids were cautious at first, especially Abigail. "Why is Mommy acting so different?" she asked me one evening after a visit. "She's trying to be better," I said carefully. "For you and Noah. But it's okay to take your time to figure out how you feel." Slowly, the walls began to come down. Rachel started showing up for school events, sitting quietly in the back to support the kids without drawing attention to herself. She called regularly to check in, not to ask about me, but to hear about their days. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the kids smiling when they talked about her. Still, I couldn't let myself get swept up in her redemption. She had hurt me too deeply, and while I appreciated her efforts, I knew we could never go back to what we were. During one of our conversations, she brought it up. "Do you think we'll ever?" She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she was asking. "No," I said gently but firmly. "Rachel, I'm glad you're trying to be better. I really am. But too much has happened. My focus is on the kids now, and that's not going to change." She nodded, a bittersweet smile on her lips. "I understand. Thank you, Michael, for giving me this chance with them." Rachel's journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and moments where her guilt got the better of her, but she kept trying, and in time, she became a better mother. As for me, I moved forward, knowing that while Rachel's redemption was her own story to write, mine was about building a new life for me and my children. One built on trust, love, and the lessons we'd all learned along the way. Moving forward after everything that happened wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sheer exhaustion of starting over. But every time I looked at Abigail and Noah, I was reminded of why I had to keep going. They were my anchor, my reason to fight for a better future. The first step was rebuilding a sense of normalcy at home. The house had felt heavy for months, like the walls themselves were holding onto the tension and pain. So, I decided to make some changes. Together, the kids and I painted the living room a warm yellow, Abigail's favorite color. We rearranged furniture, put up new family photos, and even added a small chalkboard wall in the kitchen where they could doodle and write little notes. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about creating a home that felt safe and full of love again. The kids adjusted slowly but surely. At first, they were hesitant, especially Abigail. She had always been closer to Rachel, and I knew she was grappling with the confusion of loving her mom but being hurt by her actions. I made a point of being there for her, listening without judgment when she wanted to talk and giving her space when she didn't. Noah, being younger, bounced back a little quicker. He started asking me to play soccer with him in the yard, something I hadn't done as much as I should have before all of this. Those moments, running around and laughing with him, felt like tiny victories, proof that we were moving in the right direction. Rachel remained a part of the kids' lives, though it wasn't always easy. Her supervised visits gradually became more relaxed as she proved she was committed to rebuilding her relationship with them. There were still awkward moments, like the time Noah asked her point-blank, "Why didn't you want to live with us anymore?" Her answer wasn't perfect, but she handled it with grace, telling him, "I made mistakes, Noah. Big ones. But I love you and your sister more than anything, and I'm trying to make things right." I could see the toll her choices had taken on her. She was trying, but the consequences of her actions weighed heavily. She had lost the life we'd built together, and while I admired her efforts to reconnect with the kids, I couldn't let myself dwell on what might have been. Instead, I focused on the future. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd resisted for a long time. At first, it felt strange to sit in a room and spill my thoughts to a stranger, but over time, it became a lifeline. I worked through the anger, the betrayal, and the guilt I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The sessions didn't erase the pain, but they helped me learn how to move forward without letting it define me. Eventually, I began to open my heart to new possibilities. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost. It was about creating something new. I started spending time with people again, going to gatherings I'd once avoided, and even agreeing to a few casual coffee dates when friends insisted I needed to get back out there. One evening, Abigail noticed me getting ready and asked, "Are you going on a date, Dad?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer, but then I nodded. "Yeah, I am. Is that okay with you?" She thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "You deserve to be happy too." Her words stuck with me. I didn't know where this new chapter would lead, but I knew I owed it to myself and to my kids to find happiness again. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were ours. We celebrated small milestones, like Abigail scoring her first goal in a soccer game or Noah mastering a new song on the piano. We created new traditions, like Sunday movie nights and family hikes. Every laugh, every hug, every quiet moment felt like a step toward healing. As for Rachel, she continued to work on herself. She became a better mother over time. And while we would never be the family we once were, I respected her efforts to make amends. We coexisted for the kids' sake, and I could see that they were happier knowing we were both committed to their well-being. In the end, my fresh start wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning from it. The betrayal had scarred me, but it hadn't broken me. I found strength in my role as a father, in the love of my children, and in the hope of a brighter future. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that brighter days were truly ahead.